Dr. Ken Landau. Thanks for watching. Let's talk about melatonin, very commonly used sleep aid. It's a natural hormone produced by the pineal gland, but the kind that you purchase is manufactured in a laboratory. It's estimated that somewhere around 35 million people use it during the course of a year. It was originally described in connection with the mechanisms that reptiles and amphibians use to change the color of their skin. In 1917, an extract of the pineal gland was found to be very important in changing the tadpole skin color, and that led to a dermatologist at Yale University in 1958 describing the compound, isolating it, and naming it melatonin. That led subsequently to a doctor at MIT in 1970 describing it as very important for circadian rhythms. Subsequently, in the 90s, it was found to be an antioxidant. And in 1995, a patent was given to Dr. Richard Workman at the MIT for use of low-dose melatonin at a dose of 0.3 milligrams as a sleep aid. Now, melatonin is available in a variety of different forms. It's available as a tablet, or as a capsule, or as a liquid, or a chewable. It's available as a lozenge or a sublingual form, even transdermal form, and anywhere between a dose of 0.3 milligrams up to 10 milligrams. It's regulated by the Food and Drug Administration as a dietary supplement. And that means that there is considerably less control than over an over-the-counter drug or a prescription drug. It's called the hormone of darkness because it's produced at night. It starts being produced by the brain around 9 p.m., and by 9 a.m. it seems to be gone. Now, in the daytime, if we try to measure the melatonin in the system, can't really find any. Light is the most powerful control over when and how melatonin is going to be produced. It seems that the melatonin is very important in determining our 24-hour cycle. If we get too much light in the evening, we're not going to produce the melatonin at the normal time, and we won't go to sleep until much later. On the other hand, if we have a lot of light very early in the morning, we're going to get up early and go to sleep probably earlier. The amount of light differs between summer and winter time. Obviously, that changes the melatonin metabolism, and it's partially responsible for our difficulty in adjusting to daylight savings time. Now, it's most studied in training our body to a 24-hour cycle, but it's important to realize that it is not really a sleeping pill. While it's associated with sleep, at least in humans, if we look at animals that are active in the nighttime, that's still when they peak their melatonin production. Well, there's a lot more to melatonin than simply a sleep aid. Melatonin probably has important roles in fertility, in cancer, in psychiatry, in immunity, and even in blood pressure control. A lot of people think that it's just a sleeping pill and it doesn't have any kind of interactions with anything. But let's start off and discuss a little bit about some of the potential side effects of taking melatonin. So, for instance, there can be side effects because it can interact with a bunch of other substances. It can change the mood, worsen the mood in people who have dementia. And in children and adolescents, it can interfere with the normal hormone production. So it can change the level of hormone in people going through their sexual maturation. In some people, it leads to drowsiness or decreased alertness or headache or nausea or dizziness. Sometimes it can lead to short-term feeling of depression or tremor or anxiety. In some people, it causes abdominal cramps or back pain or irritability, cause grogginess the next day. So you got to be a little careful when you start taking melatonin about whether it's safe for you to operate your car or heavy machinery. Especially in the elderly, it can cause the temperature, the body temperature, to decline. It can boost the immunity, which sounds like it ought to be a good idea, but that might be a problem if a person has rheumatoid arthritis or has allergies. It can disrupt the menses. It can impede the normal hormone development, change the level of prolactin in the body. That's typically associated with production of breast milk. It can cause issues in the liver and in the kidneys, cause vivid dreams, and in the elderly, especially the elderly, it might lead to restlessness or confusion or disorientation or decreased blood pressure, sometimes blood clots, and even change in skin pigmentation. And it can interfere with the blood thinners. It can also interfere with a bunch of herbal supplements, St. John's wort or skullcap or valerian or California poppy. Interfere with ACE inhibitors, with antidepressants in the Prozac or Zoloft or Paxil family. Can interfere with sedatives and anticonvulsants and immunosuppressants. We don't think it's probably a good idea for pregnant women or women who are breastfeeding because it really hasn't been tested. There are two forms of melatonin. One is the immediate release and the other is a delayed release. The immediate release, the most popular, well, it's probably not very good as a sleep aid because while you can absorb it in about an hour, it's going to be metabolized in about 40 to 50 minutes. That means after about 90 minutes, there's no melatonin left. It's all passed out in the urine. So if you thought that taking melatonin was going to get you through the night, it's not going to do that. It's only going to last about 90 minutes. But there's a long-acting or a delayed release form that seems to be much better for sleep and even for controlling high blood pressure, especially high blood pressure during the evening hours. Obviously, it has a longer half-life. Now, the National Institutes of Health has some questions, and the questions regard the usefulness, what's the appropriate dose, even when to take it, and how safe is it. They say it's probably safe, the immediate release form for 3 months, the delayed release form for 12 months. Now, if you take melatonin and you do not have an underlying sleep disorder, it's not going to cause any improvement in your sleep. It's not going to cause any lengthening in your sleep, but it may cause fatigue the next day. Probably won't cause drowsiness, but just fatigue. So it's been used principally for jet lag and for shift work and for insomnia. It's also used for children who have autism and other mentally challenged states. It's used to keep people who are totally blind to a 24-hour phase. And, interestingly, it's used for people, especially teenagers, who can't seem to go to sleep on time. They have what we call a delayed sleep phase disorder. So they go to sleep 2 or 3 hours later than everybody else, and they wake up 2 or 3 hours also later than everybody else. So melatonin seems to bring them back to normal. Well, it also can be used in people who are taking medicines that interrupt the sleep phase. So beta blockers, it can be used when you take a beta blocker to help keep you sleeping relatively normally. It can be used for people who are going through the discontinuation phase of either benzodiazepines or sleeping pills or getting off of cigarettes. It can be used for people who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. If we look at the traditional uses, let's say jet lag, well, it only shortens the time necessary to fall asleep by about 12 minutes, mostly on eastward travel. And timing is important. You have to take it at the right time, otherwise it isn't going to work. For shift work, it's certainly highly touted, but there's minimal to limited evidence that it does anything for that. As far as insomnia is concerned, the evidence is of very low quality that it does anything. It might speed the onset of sleep by about 6 minutes, but it only increases the overall sleep time by about 8 minutes. Now, if you have difficulty falling asleep because you have the delayed sleep-wake phase disorder that I mentioned a moment ago, if you take the melatonin in the evening and exclude light, be rigorous about excluding light, and then turn the lights on a couple hours before you wake up, put them on a timer, and have some bright light exposure, then that seems to help and train you better to a 24-hour cycle that everybody else is going on. In elderly individuals, it can improve sleep quality you have to realize that melatonin is one of those chemicals that is significantly reduced in its production over the course of time. So that if we look at a person who's 60 years old, they're not producing anywhere near as much as somebody who's 20 or 30 years old. Well, there's also a problem called REM sleep behavior disorder. Normally in REM sleep, you have these vivid dreams, but you can't move around. You're basically paralyzed. Well, as the melatonin level goes down, some people are able to move about. They can act out their dreams, and that means that they could cause some injury to a spouse who's there in bed. But if a person is given melatonin, then it seems that that perhaps resolves the problem. But there is another problem. And the problem, according to Dr. Wertman, is if you take the melatonin on a regular basis, eventually you're going to desensitize the brain, and that means there's going to be less response to the hormone, whether it's a natural hormone that we're manufacturing in the brain or even to the pill that you're taking, and that can lead to insomnia. And it's doubly so if you happen to take the pill at the wrong time. Now, interestingly, during the nighttime hours, your blood pressure dips, and your blood pressure dips by about 10 or 20%. That's very essential for cardiovascular health. People who don't have this blood pressure dip in the nighttime have about a threefold increase in their incidence of suffering cardiovascular disease. They have more hypertension, they have more angina, they have more heart attacks. The likelihood of your being a non-dipper increases with age, increases in people who have poor quality sleep, increases in the elderly who have low levels of melatonin anyway. And it seems to be especially a problem in people who have diabetes or obstructive sleep apnea or metabolic syndrome, and people who have secondary hypertension. That means hypertension because you have a kidney problem or some other kind of a problem. Well, if people are given melatonin at night, it seems that we can get a return of that nocturnal blood pressure dipping. So the systolic pressure goes down by about 6 millimeters, and the diastolic goes down by about 4 millimeters, sometime between about 2 and 6 a.m. Now, the physiology of melatonin, it has to do with light. Light goes in through the eye. Light goes into an area of the brain known as the hypothalamus, specifically the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that shoots some messages off to the pineal gland, and the pineal gland turns off the melatonin. Well, at nighttime, there's no light, so it turns on the melatonin. It starts to be produced around 9 p.m., and it's out by about 8 a.m. And it's very important that not only does the reduction in the melatonin in the morning increase our body temperature. Remember, at nighttime, the body temperature goes down. At morning time, it goes up. But then we increase our cortisol level, a variety of other substances. Now, melatonin is important because over the course of 24 hours, over the course of a day, we think that everybody is entrained to 24 hours, but they're not. The body, if we keep a body in a dark room, a body is going to have a natural day of somewhere around 24 and a half hours. Obviously, given the time, the miscue is very important in causing sleep problems. However, if we have normal melatonin levels, that may well get rid of the problem. Melatonin starts to be produced so that it's regular levels by 3 months in infants. Teenagers seem to have some problems with this delayed phase sleep-wake cycle that we talked about. They have difficulty getting onto the 24-hour day that we all consider as normal, so melatonin will be appropriate for them. And in seniors, the levels seem to fall off. In people in their 20s, the level of melatonin might be about 80 units. By age 50, it's down to 50 units. And in the 70s, it's only about 30 units. The pineal gland has the most calcification of any organ in the body other than the bone. It's associated with age. And the more the pineal gland calcifies, the less melatonin it's going to be produced. Now, we said that light is a culprit, but it seems that the most harmful rays, at least as far as melatonin is concerned, are the blue waves. And the blue waves are the shortest of the visible light. That's right before the ultraviolet rays. And the blue rays, your exposure to the blue rays, going to significantly decrease the amount of melatonin that you produce. And what gives off a lot of blue waves? Well, it happens to be the computers, the LED light, the tablets and the smartphones and the computer books and the ebooks. So if we look at a person who is reading an ebook and a person who's reading a regular book, the person who's reading the printed book, that person is going to fall asleep and get a better night's sleep. The person who's reading the tablet is going to have less REM sleep, going to have more problem falling asleep, going to have increased alertness at night, and going to be groggier the next day. That person should probably wear some kind of goggles or at least turn down the brightness on the display. Fortunately, incandescent lights, they don't have very much blue light at all. And if we look at the wintertime, not much blue light coming through during the wintertime. Fires, mostly yellow light. Melatonin is produced through an amino acid known as tryptophan. You get it from your diet, you get it from body metabolism. And it takes the tryptophan and it goes through tryptamine, serotonin, finally to get to the melatonin. Now, melatonin originally was thought to act through some receptors, MT1, MT2. They're on the outside of cells. They recognize the melatonin, they latch up to the melatonin, and then that alters the skeleton of the cells. So the cells do different things. They signal the interior, they signal the nucleus to do certain things. That's the way genes are activated. But it seems that it's much more complicated than that, because now we know that there are other kind of receptors, not just those traditional MT1, MT2 receptors, but they're receptors that are outside. And not only are there other kind of receptors, we now know that the MT1, MT2, they can interact with the body's immune system. And now we know that it's not just the pineal gland that produces melatonin. Melatonin is manufactured in the bone marrow, in the eye, in the liver, in the pancreas. It's manufactured in the adrenal gland, in the endometrium, the uterus, in the skin, in the cells lining the blood vessels, in the brain. It's manufactured in the testes and in the thymus gland. And the receptors aren't just on the cells. It's not just in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, but it seems that receptors are now present in the aorta, in the blood vessel walls, in the fat, the brown fat, the white fat. They're present in the lung, the kidney, the skin, the pancreas, the immune system, in the heart. Well, it's manufactured, as I said, from tryptophan. It's manufactured in all animals, vertebrates, humans, of course. It's important in reproductive behavior and the manufacture of the color of the skin, coat, camouflage. But it also is manufactured in bacteria and fungi and plants and the leaves and the stems and the roots and the fruits and the seeds. It's present in various proportions under various growing conditions. And these lower forms don't have any receptors. So the range is going to be quite considerable. Why is it important, let's say, in the plants? Well, it's important because it seems to regulate growth, seems to help with exposure to stresses of the environment. So excessive sodium or excessive temperature or drought or toxic environment. And there can be significant amounts of melatonin produced, so that if you eat a bunch of walnuts or drink a bunch of coffee, that's going to alter the melatonin level in your body. We're going to be able to measure it, but we also find that there's melatonin in oats and wheat and barley and rice and corn and bananas and pineapples and oranges and beer and in wine. And in addition to all of that, melatonin seems to act specifically in the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the cells that make the energy. And not only do they make the energy, they make an awful lot of free radicals. And if you remember, I said in 1993 it was found that melatonin was a significant antioxidant. Well, there are a lot of oxidants that are produced inside the mitochondria. Well, what else could melatonin potentially be used for? Melatonin seems to have a role in cancer, maybe breast cancer and prostate cancer. Those are the best studied. But it also might have a complementary role. It's being used in experiments now in people who have cancer of the brain, cancer of the lung, cancer of the head and neck, or gastrointestinal cancers, cancer of the liver. It reduces the side effects of chemotherapy, reduces the side effects including weight loss and muscle pain and weakness and decreased blood cells. It might be oncostatic. It might slow down the growth of some of the tumors, reduce the motility of the tumors, because remember I said it worked on the cytoskeleton, and the cytoskeleton is the way that cells move around inside the body. It might increase survival when it's added to traditional cancer therapy, increase the quality of life, maybe even increase the response to certain of the chemotherapies. And when we talk about radiation therapy, it seems that radiation therapy causes the damage to the cells by producing the free radicals. And remember, we have an antioxidant. So although 70% of the damage from radiation therapy seems to come from the free radicals, it might be that melatonin can mitigate or reduce some of those harmful side effects. And there's a question about whether it's helpful in people who have cognitive impairment. So in the early stage of Alzheimer's disease, we know that there's insomnia. Well, that's a significant problem, and it can interfere with memory. Everyone knows that you don't seem to function as well if you haven't gotten a good night's sleep. You have poor sleep quality, especially in the elderly who have the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. And it seems that there's a special kind of lymph-like network inside the brain that's only active during sleep. And it's called the glymphatic system. That eliminates waste, may well reduce the amount of amyloid that's in the brain. So it may well be that melatonin has a role in early Alzheimer's disease. As far as the immune system is concerned, well, the concentration of melatonin peaks at night, and that's in parallel when production of the white blood cells and the neutrophils and the macrophages and all those cells that are associated with the immune system are produced. So that's another interesting connection between melatonin and now immunity. And it has effects on female reproduction. It modifies the amount of estrogen that's produced and also androgen, the male hormone. And it alters the concentration of FSH and LH. Those are the hormones produced in the pituitary gland that control ovarian function. And because it is a potent antioxidant, it may well help prevent a variety of other age-related disorders. It's at least twice as active as vitamin E, and it stimulates the production of other antioxidant enzymes in the body. So the mechanism of action, multiple different areas, and it seems that at least melatonin might be an anti-inflammatory, anti-anxiety agent, an antidepressant, an anti-tumor agent. It works against producing excessive blood vessels. It may well modulate pain, reduce pain, protect the heart, protect the blood pressure. It works on those high affinity receptors to change the body's immune system. It can decrease the prostaglandins. That's why you take an aspirin. But unfortunately, a lot of the studies on everything that I just mentioned, the studies vary significantly. They're not really high-quality studies. There's variation in the dose and the duration of the study, the intensity of the interaction, the gender of the patients, the comorbid diseases, the other kind of diseases, even whether the studies are performed in an urban environment where there's a lot of extra light that changes the melatonin production. Climate, latitude obviously has a significant role, but we look at melatonin now in consideration of a variety of other conditions, maybe cardiovascular disease, premature aging, obesity, mental disorders, pain syndromes from surgery, from inflammatory diseases, people who have irritable bowel syndrome, people who have dyspepsia, addictive disorders, as I mentioned, for withdrawal from different substances. It's now being considered maybe as having a role in tinnitus and bone loss, aging, in depression, fibromyalgia, migraine headaches, cluster headaches, epilepsy, autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, gastrointestinal reflux disorder. That means basically heartburn, ulcerative colitis, gallstones. It might have some role in combating infectious diseases because remember we said that it's being produced by the bacteria, by the fungi, by the viruses. Well, it also is being considered as a mechanism to alter the menstruation, the timing of menstruation, the length of the cycle, the timing of menopause, and even the menopausal symptoms. And even topically as a therapy for sunburn. Now, it's available in the United States and Canada and Europe over the counter, but in some countries like the United Kingdom, they recognize it as a neurohormone, and it's only available there with a prescription. And in other countries, it's thought to be a dangerous product, and it's not available at all. Now, you have to realize it is a dietary supplement. It is not a food additive. Several companies tried in 2010, 2015 to add it to certain kind of beverages. Food and Drug Administration said, you can't do that. You just can't do that. And you have to realize that since it's a dietary supplement, the labeling on the package isn't very good. There's a wide variation in the quality. The cost varies 300-fold and the dose varies at least 30 plus times. Remember, anything between a 0.3 milligram and a 10 milligram. And unfortunately, some of the pills don't even have the active ingredient in them. So if you're going to go buy melatonin, make sure that the product you get has the USP verified label on it, United States Pharmacopoeia. And those products have been tested and are sort of assured that what you pay for is what you get. And remember, if you're going to take melatonin, if you take the 1 milligram or 3 milligram tablet, that's going to increase your blood level more than 20-fold compared to what your natural production of melatonin is going to be. So in the long run, let's consider melatonin's past and future and say that melatonin has come a long way. It's sort of like the cannabinoids. Once they were thought of as just marijuana, and now they're thought of as potentially important in a variety of different diseases or different disease states because we find receptors all over the body. Same thing happens to be with melatonin. So the idea that melatonin is simply something that you take to sleep, that's probably the minor part of the melatonin story. Thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Ken Landau.